Hello everyone, Nathan again, back with our next video. I wanted to answer pretty much the most frequently asked question that I get at the moment, which is why do I live in Georgia, what do I like about Georgia, and various questions about Georgia as like a location. So I thought I would go through all of them today. I've been living here 3 years. I've owned multiple businesses here. So I just thought I'd share my experiences and so on. I think this will be quite a long video, so I'll cut this up into sections so you can skip through into whatever part is most relevant to you, whatever you're most interested in learning about. So as I said, I've lived here for 3 years, and we'll start off with the introduction. Georgia came up on my radar from a few different people. For one, I was working with a Georgian software developer on one of my businesses, Notifier, which is most of you will probably know it, a website plugin for collecting emails, increasing conversion rates, and so on. And the main developer on that is a Georgian developer. He was based in Tbilisi. So we were working together on Notifier for about a year before I ever even met him. We had built a successful business together. It was profitable, we were paying customers. But I'd never even spoken to him on the phone. In fact, we did all communication purely through messages over Slack. So he was based in Georgia, and then I had another colleague of mine, sort of more of like a mentor, I would say actually, who mentioned Georgia to me a few times. He had never actually been there, but he was recommended it, and it was coming up on his radar. And there's also a podcast, he runs a podcast. He's sort of like an accountant / tax advisor for 7-figure entrepreneurs, so for people who make over $1 million a year. And he references to Georgia quite a lot as being a good place to have a base, which I do agree with. So anyway, Georgia had been coming up on my radar from these sort of different angles, and I had just arrived back from Bali, from Indonesia. I'd spent a month with a friend of mine, very nice tropical island, and I arrived back in London. I came out, walked out of Heathrow Airport, and it was like winter in London, pouring down with rain, cold, depressing, and I just thought I don't even want to be here. So I messaged my friend. I said I'm going to come out to Tbilisi for a week. I booked a one-way flight as I always do, just because it gives you that freedom in both directions. If you like it, you can choose to stay longer, whereas if you don't like it, you can choose to shorten your trip, so you can adjust accordingly. And with Tbilisi, I had no idea what to expect. I didn't do any research. I knew it was it was part of the Soviet Union previously. And I'd lived in Vilnius on and off for over the course of a few years. I'd been in Vilnius. So I was expecting some similarities, but I really did not know what to expect when getting off that plane. And I'll tell you now, I could not have had a warmer welcome into the country. The developer, we were friends by this point. So my friend and his wife, the friend is who I was working on Notifier with, the software developer. They came, they picked me up from the airport. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning. He took me back to his girlfriend's mother's house, and they just laid out this Georgian feast for breakfast. So Georgian food is really nice, but it's quite heavy. It will be a lot of bread, carbs, cheeses, a lot of meat, fish, and so on. But really, really good food. And also, Georgia was the country that invented wine. I think it was about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. It's the country where they found the most dated evidence of wine being made, and they're very, very proud of that. So there's a very large sort of wine drinking culture in Georgia, and they make very nice wines, sort of semi-sweet red wines that they make really, really nice. And so anyway, we were drinking wine, and they just brought out continuous amounts of food, which is what they do in Georgia. And then they showed me around the city. They took me to my like Airbnb. Just like honestly, could not have asked for like a warmer welcome. And the original plan was just to spend like a week here, a couple of weeks here, working with my colleague in a co-working space, and we just thought it would be very productive if we worked together for a few weeks. My plan, and still to this day, I never actually had a moment where I said I'm going to live in Georgia. It sort of happened very, very naturally. So before I knew it, I'd been out here for like a month, and I was renting an Airbnb, and I thought maybe I should get an apartment because they're quite cheap here. Rent an apartment. So I rented an apartment, and I got a clause that I could leave the contract within any like 1 month period, which worked really well for me. Because it means I still have my like freedom to leave. And then summer came around. Georgia has great summers, really hot, very, very green city. And I was just working. I made friends with some other like foreigners living out here. I hired a couple of staff. I started dating a Georgian girl, and it just sort of happened. Like 2-3 years went by very, 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 very quickly. So that was basically how I ended up here. I'll just list off like a few, I guess, like useful facts to know about Georgia. So it's a population of about 3 million people. 1.5 million of those live in the main city, which is called Tbilisi. Tbilisi has like a sort of European feel to it, but Georgia geographically is located east of Turkey and south of Russia, and it's sort of the final country that can claim itself within Europe. Anything more to the east, you're talking like Middle East countries, and further over than that is Asia. So Tbilisi is like right in the middle of Asia and Europe. Other than that, it has a very, very unique language. So they speak Georgian here, and it has its own unique alphabet. And it's got this very, very rich history in Georgia, especially for such a small country. It's very, very interesting history. And I think it's because tactically it's in quite a tactical, like geographical location where a lot of countries have to travel through it to trade goods to each other. It's been invaded quite a few times. Even to this day, 20% of the country is occupied by Russia. This has actually been recorded on the Top Gear, not the Grand Tour, the new Top Gear program. They actually did a road trip through Georgia, and they saw the border, and it's known that the Russian police or army actually moved this overnight. They're constantly, essentially invading the country. They're occupying the territory. And they documented a story of a farmer who one day woke up and he was in Russia, and they won't let him back over. The Russians wouldn't let him back over, and he said if he tried, they would shoot him. So it's really, really quite sad. There are like the thing to realise as well is Georgia is a developing country, and I think if you were going to live here, you sort of there are some things you have to accept. That, especially if you're going, for example, I grew up in London for like 21 years, it is not going to be anything like London in both positive and negative ways. So to give you an example of some of like the positives, the things that I really like, very, very friendly towards small businesses. You can, as a foreigner, you can walk in and you can register a company and it will be set up for you the next day. All you need is your passport. It's going to cost you $50. Banking system here, personal banking system, is great. Business banking, not so good, even though they're with the same bank. It's just that there's a real difference in the level of quality that you get between personal and business banking. Personal is fantastic. You can walk in, you will have a personal bank account also, you'll have it set up within 30 minutes, you can go there with your passport. Georgia is great because you will pay 0% tax on foreign income. It's completely legal, very, very smart move by the government. I'll just explain why quickly. I used to work on for two reasons actually. I used to work on a project within the EU. It was like a sort of EU incubator where they would invest in startups. And the reason that they were doing this is because there's a very large investment culture in the US for investment firms to invest in startups. And there are a lot of great startups that come out of Europe. Berlin, tech capital, London, when it was part of the EU anyway, was of course a lot of great startups coming out of there. Amsterdam, Estonia has some great companies as well. Lithuania is now becoming like a fintech capital. Vilnius is. So there are a lot of great startups that do come out of Europe, but there's just not such a big investment culture here. So often they would get investment from American companies, American investment firms, and they would be forced, they would be required to make another US entity to reincorporate their business in the US, often in Delaware or something like that, so that the investment company had more control over their money, and it could also be for tax reasons in the US. I'm not quite sure of the specifics, but it was pretty much a requirement. If they were going to take investment from the US, they would have to reincorporate within the US. And what happened is all of these great startups were coming out of the EU, but then because as soon as they started to get some traction, they were reincorporating in the US. The EU was missing out on all of the taxes that they thought they would make, and the US economy was booming because they were just bringing all of these sort of unicorns, like successful startups coming out of Europe, and the US was benefiting from the taxes that they were paying. And it was costing the EU a lot of money, so they actually decided to set up their own digital incubator to combat this problem. And a second reason on top of that, so by Georgia making it very friendly towards startups and offering 0% tax on foreign income, it can't be beaten in the US. Like in the US, you're going to be paying taxes on your income. So it encourages businesses to, number one, to incorporate here. It encourages people like me, foreign entrepreneurs, to register my companies here. And I will hire staff, I will pay taxes on goods I purchase within Georgia. Remember, it's only tax on foreign income, which just helps to push the economy forward. In my opinion, it is a great, great move. Another benefit of that is something when I used to work on a project in the UK, something government related. I was told by quite a senior individual that for the UK government to bring in, for example, €1 into the British economy. So if I'm a business and I'm selling to Europe and bringing in money out of a different country and into the UK, into the British economy, it's worth 3 times more to the UK economy than if I was just to sell locally. Because technically, if I'm just selling within the same country I'm in, I'm just recycling money that already exists in that current economy. Whereas if you're selling to internationally and you're bringing money from a foreign country into the country that you're in, it is very, very beneficial for the economy here because you're bringing new money into the system. That is why it's very, very smart, in my opinion, for Georgia to not tax you on foreign income, because it really encourages you to bring new, of course it encourages you to incorporate your business here, and you will just be bringing in foreign income, money from other countries into the Georgian economy, which strengthens the Georgian economy. Very, very clever move. Generally in business, I do like their decisions. Some of their other decisions are a bit questionable, particularly when it comes to roads and just like I don't know, let's call them like bureaucracy type issues, where just a real lack of organisation, in my opinion. But in terms of small businesses, I think they do really quite well. There's a lot of grants and things like that, with both government grants and also business. Through banks, you can receive grants, and they're not investments. It's free money. You don't have to give up any percentage of equity. And there's tons of them. I literally can't list them off. You would have to look into them, particularly in like the digital tech space. There's really a lot of options. A friend of mine just secured $150,000 without having to give up a single share in his company. Which is also good to know that they are trying to like push you forward. But then there are some other very, I don't know, like one example would be in accounting, a negative example. For example, in the UK, we would submit, if you register a new company, you don't have to submit taxes for the first 18 months. And you only have to do it once per year anyway, after that. So you just have to keep your receipts, invoices, income, outgoing, and so on, and then you just submit that and you pay the amount of tax that you would owe. In Georgia, they ask you to do it every single month, and for a new company, I think it's a really, I don't know, I think it's very short-term thinking, because yes, okay, they get their money a little bit quicker, but it puts a lot of pressure on the startup, which is going to have so many expenses anyway in the first month getting up and running. I think it'd be much, much smarter to do something similar to what the UK are doing, where you give the company a bit of breathing space, at least for 12 months, rather than, like, we pay our accountants about $300 here on like a small company for them to just submit these returns every month. It's $3,600 per year, and that's not even including the taxes that you have to pay and think about. It's just, they should give companies a little bit more breathing space to get up and running, and then after a year, after 18 months, and you shouldn't be required to do it every single month, in my opinion. It may help with cash flow for the government, but I really think it's quite short-sighted. I think they would see a lot more success and a lot more startups growing if there was more breathing space on that side of things. I don't really want to get like too political. Number one, like, I'm far from an expert on Georgian politics. I can literally just discuss what I see around me. There are protests. I would say there will be multiple protests per year. There will be about 3 or 4 protests per year. They have reached like international news at points, often to do with gay rights and things like that. There's a real sort of shift going on between the younger generation and like the older generation, or what I think are like a lot of people that are not in the city centre, right? They're sort of from villages or various remote regions from like outside of the city. The city generally, I think, is very, very open-minded, particularly with like the young generation. But then you'll have like these people who have more of like a fixed mindset, who they're not happy. For example, there was like a sex shop that opened and people were throwing bricks at it. There was I think it was a gay rights protest, and then there were a load of protesters who came and they were burning like gay flags and so on. So it's going through like a shift basically, but I don't want that to. It's sort of a small percentage that are putting a bad, because when it reaches international news, I think that's what people will think Georgia is like, and I promise you it's not at all. That is like a tiny percentage of people living here who sort of, in my opinion, have views like that, and it causes like a bad look for the whole country. I think Georgia could do a better job of dealing with it, but again, I'm not an expert on it. It's just my opinions. Then there are also like just some almost like laughable decisions where, they had like this main road, one of the main roads through the centre of the city, and they decided to build the bus stops in the middle of the road, so people have to cross a double carriage, like dual lanes on each side. There's 4 lanes in total, and in the middle of 2 lanes there's a bus stop, and then on the other side there's 2 other lanes, which just doesn't make any like sense to me at all. It meant that they have to put traffic lights all the way along this main road, so now it's just like there's no movement of like traffic at all. It's completely ridiculous. And to make matters even worse, if you think of a bus, how it opens, because they put it in the centre of the road, the buses actually have to drive the wrong way down the road. So you have cars going one way, a bus going in an opposite direction on that side, and then the same on the opposite side of the road. So it's just completely ludicrous, and it just makes you question how some of these things get approved. Again, it's a developing country. I'm completely fine with it. It doesn't affect me so much, but there are just some funny things that you see going on. Some questionable decisions, let's say, particularly as the reason for doing this was to reduce pollution and promote the use of public transport. For one, COVID had just started, and I don't think it's the best idea to be promoting people to be crammed on in these buses, which, like they are, is a sort of city like that. The buses are absolutely packed, and I don't think it's a good idea to encourage that. And number two, by causing people to sit in so much traffic for so long, because the buses only come along every few minutes, and then there's these other lanes that are just completely full of traffic the whole time. I think they probably increased pollution as a whole. Anyway, not my area of expertise, just as a funny story for you, some funny decision making going on. The other thing that you will have to accept if you did decide to live here is customer service is atrocious. It is unbelievably bad, regardless of if you're in a 5-star hotel. In fact, I would argue that some of them are even worse. It's just not what their forte is, which I always found quite surprising, because as people, they are so hospitable. They're some of the nicest people ever. I personally think it's because wages are so low here that people just generally don't really care about their jobs. So a waiter or waitress isn't that motivated to work, which I guess leads me on to my next point of salaries and how much does it cost to live in Georgia. So salaries, an average salary here is about $400 for just like average skilled work. People do earn higher than that. I think the Prime Minister's salary is about $1,500 per month, and then if someone's working in like a shop, for example, I was told that on an overnight shift in like a major supermarket, they would earn about $180 per month. There's no minimum wage here as well, and people working in like the factories and so on outside of the city centre, I've been told they can earn as little as like $80 or $150 per month, which is actually cheaper than China. The cost of labour in Georgia, it is cheaper than China in a lot of places. And the cost of living in Georgia, that's really down to you. There's two sort of main areas, like Vera and Vaque, which are like, Vera is quite a cool area, a lot of bars, little restaurants, cafes, so on, things like this. And then Vaque is a little bit more, let's call it posh, but developing country posh, nothing like London or Mayfair or anything like that. But it's considered like a high-class place to live. It's more expensive. You can get an apartment there for $400 to $600 per month, with like 1 or 2 bedrooms. And of course you can spend much more if you want to, but you would get like a comfortable place for that. In terms of eating, it's really very cheap to eat out. I've barely cooked a meal, and I mean I've cooked under 10 meals in the last 3 years that I've lived here, because it's so cheap to just order food and have it delivered, which is also part of the reason I put on weight since I've been out here. Just the hassle of having to go to the shop, cook the food, clean up after, and the time involved in doing it, when the cost of doing it is almost the same if you just order the food in. It's really quite, for about $1,000 per month you could have a good life, and I mean a good life in Georgia. If you've got $2,000 or $3,000 of disposable income, you can literally do whatever you want. You'll be living like a king here. The one thing that I will say though is there's a limit to the quality of life that you can have. So when I say a good life, I mean you can eat in like there's a restaurant here which is top 50 in the world. There's another one which I think is meant to be top 10 in the world. Not quite sure about if it should be, but and they're really quite cheap. So you can have a very good quality of life here. But if you're talking like Michelin star restaurants, luxury London style living, for example, something like that, you cannot purchase it here. It is physically not available to buy. Even in the best hotels here, the service it's nowhere near like a 5-star hotel that you would. Even in like Turkey, for example, which is a neighbouring country, they really have like fantastic service, but it just does not exist in Georgia. And trust me, I've stayed everywhere. There's like 1 or 2 places that are good, and there was one restaurant I went to actually, and they said that they actually didn't hire Georgians because they felt that it was much easier to hire foreigners who had experience in European service to work like that. But Yeah, I think that it's just, as I said, it's a developing country. It's not. It's just something to be aware of. Don't expect like 5-star service anywhere. You will not be able to buy it. And other than that, I guess like on like the dating side of things, it's again going through a bit of a shift as a country, in my opinion. I've had situations where I was dating a girl who wanted marriage very, very quickly, out of like respect for her family. And then there are also girls like who are just I guess like more European mentality, like much more relaxed. They're not so just I guess like more open-minded, open to like one-night stands. Online dating doesn't really exist here. There are girls on there, but they're judged quite a lot for being on there. I find so like you're much better off talking to girls in person or Instagram. Um, Georgian women are very, very loyal. Really, they make fantastic girlfriends. Actually, really, really good. Very much focused on like looking after the man and very respectful. Really, very respectful. Very, very loyal. Yeah, I highly recommend for like a relationship a Georgian woman. Especially like in long-term relationships, 100%. I think you do very well to wife a Georgian woman. Um, Things to mention that are quite interesting is as a foreigner, generally, I believe you have a much better quality of life compared to the Georgian living here. As I said, they're just really quite hospitable, and you're just treated like really very friendly, like very nicely everywhere you go. I really think you have a better situation than a local living here. Another quite unique thing is that you can also get a mortgage for a property, and you will not find many countries that will offer a foreigner a mortgage. Because I own this apartment, like have a mortgage with the bank on this apartment, I now have access to get further loans without the requirement of any down payment at all, because I've now built up some trust with them. And I think that you will struggle to find that in quite a lot of other countries if you're living there as an expat. You can also get a Georgian citizenship and claim tax residency within Georgia as long as you're here for more than 6 months of the year. And if anyone's in the US and watching and interested in what I'm saying, it's going to be a bit more difficult for you to do it. I have a friend who actually paid that accountant I mentioned earlier, Andrew Henderson. He paid him about $75,000 to work out a customized tax scheme for him. And the recommendation that he was given was to renounce his US citizenship. This cost him 75 grand. To renounce his US citizenship and to get citizenship in Georgia, which is currently what he's doing. So it is a bit more complicated if you're in the US, but for most countries within the EU, as long as you're based in Georgia for 6 months of the year, you can renounce your tax-paying status in your home country, and you can only pay tax on you will only pay tax on local income in Georgia, and you'll pay nothing on foreign income. And this is a much better setup, bearing in mind that I've used offshore companies before, I've owned offshore companies before. Georgia is a much better setup than having something in Belize or in the Seychelles, anything like that. You will get a personal banker that you can talk to anytime, $10 per month. They're on WhatsApp, you message them with whatever you want. And Georgia isn't looked at as being like a black money.
Sorry, there's something wrong. Please.
Sorry, Georgia isn't looked at as being like a black money or like tax avoiding country. So when I was working with like a offshore company, payments can get paused, especially if you're working with UK banks. They can get paused. They ask questions. They want proof of things. They want to know that you're not laundering drug money and like everything like this. So Georgia isn't like that at all. I make constant payments between the EU, between the US, and back to the UK, and I never have any issues. So if anyone does come to Georgia and set up a bank account, I've got a fantastic personal banker. She's really very good, and she's part of the reason that my experience is so seamless as well. So honestly, I